Joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, ESPN MMA insider Brett Okamoto. It's been a crazy week up there in Brooklyn as UFC 223 is tonight and has taken multiple flips and turns and changes. And Brett's here joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Brett, appreciate the time on a Saturday.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So, just give us an idea, what has this week been like for someone like you? Because, we've gone through multiple changes to the main event. Conor McGregor comes flying into town, causes all this chaos, and now UFC 223 is not even remotely close to the same card that we saw 7 days ago.
It's just being a reporter, usually fight week is it's different every week, but it kind of follows the same format. It follows the same schedule. You know when things are going to happen, and you get your questions ready, and you talk about the fight, and you break down the fights themselves. We have not been talking about fights too much this week. We've been talking about bus incidents and legal ramifications and fighters falling off of the card and different matchups changing. Normally a fight week is about getting amped up for the fights themselves, and that has not been the case this week. It's just been one thing after another. It just seems like what's going to happen next. That's what I was talking to some people yesterday. I was just like, well, something's going to happen next, because that's just the way that these days have gone. So you just kind of was waiting for the next surprise to unfold.
Before we get to the actual fights tonight, I want to ask you about Conor, because obviously it's just taken over the entire week. So was he expected to be in town all along with his buddy fighting, or was that kind of like a last minute him flying in the town deal?
No one knew. I mean, I had talked to Conor's team, and I talked to the UFC themselves, and there was hope that he'd be there. I mean, quite frankly, everybody wanted him there. It's more exciting when he's there. The title fight involved his division. So, people were hopeful that he'd be there, but no one really knew for sure. And then, the UFC had caught wind internally that he was that he may be in town the night prior to that media day that he showed up at Barclays Center. So they knew a little bit ahead of time, but by and large, everyone was sort of just wondering, anticipating whether or not he would be there or not.
What is been going on with Conor? I mean, we haven't really seen that much of him in the public eye since the Mayweather fight. Has he just been laying low with his family? Is he just been kind of going out and enjoying the high life? What has he been up to over the last several months? Because we've barely seen him up until now.
Yeah, and I think that he does that by design. He makes you miss you. He makes everyone miss him for a while, and then he turns back up, in a big way. And in the past, that's obviously worked extremely well for him. Just looking at him, seeing him in person in the courtroom yesterday, the guy looks like he's in incredible shape. If you follow his Instagram account, he's posting photos of him being in the gym again. He looks like a guy who could fight, tomorrow physically, from a physical standpoint. But he's gotten in trouble at a couple other events over the recent months. He got a traffic ticket. And people caught him leaving the courthouse and telling the mob to come after him because there was allegedly a hit on his head. I mean, this guy is living in high highs. When he pops up, everyone takes notice, and then he's gone. He's a ghost. He stays to himself.
When I saw the multiple video shots of him in his, whether you want to call it an outburst or a moment of rage when he was throwing stuff at the bus, and then you look at the videos of him coming out of the police station, going in and out of court, it almost looks like two different people. The guy who I saw on film yesterday coming out of the police station in the courthouse, he looked like the Conor that we're familiar with, a guy who's very, he's poised in the stress of the moment. No matter how crazy the situation is, no matter how loud people are, he is in control, whereas the guy we saw on Thursday was really out of control. How do we reconcile that, Brett?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good way of putting it. Is McGregor, losing control, and is he falling out of control more frequently? And when he does he go further than he ever used to? Because the guy's never really, when you really look at it, he's never truly been punished. I mean, he's been fined a few times, and he's gotten slaps on the wrist, but by and large, he gets away with what he wants to do. And so if he keeps pressing that envelope, how far does that go? How far will he take it? And you're right. I mean, he looks like a guy who's completely out of control. And we know about McGregor that he's an extremely focused individual. He is a cage fighter for a living. I mean, and those guys, when that edge goes, they're an aggressive personalities, and that was on full display in those videos of the bus incident.
If he's able to get through all these legal issues, if he's able to, maneuver around all the possible civil cases that may come along with it, not just from the fighters who were injured, but, possibly the bus company, the Barclays Center, who else who may ever try to, we live in a litigious culture now, Brett. So everybody and their cousin may get involved in a lawsuit here. But if he's able to maneuver through all of this, do you think we will see Conor fight in 2018?
I think it's possible. I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, obviously, I think the legal issues are the biggest hurdle to that, of course. Is he going to spend any time in jail? He's been charged with a felony. If he's convicted of a felony, that could have implications on his visa and his ability to come into the U.S. and fight, which is, where the UFC would most likely want to promote him. So, we need the answers to those questions. But like I said earlier, I think he's training. I think he's in great shape. I think the skills are still there, obviously. I think the desire to compete is still there. Conor has it doesn't matter what point in his career we're talking about or referring to, he has always struck me as a guy who wants to compete and wants to get in there and fight and perform under bright lights. So I think he still wants to do all of that. But, will his actions outside of the cage prevent him from doing so?
Let's get to UFC 223 itself. So we're going to have Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Al Iaquinta. And I think, listen, for the UFC to salvage it this way, it's crazy how we got here. It was Ferguson, and then it was Max Holloway, and then it might have been Anthony Pettis, and then it might have been Paul Felder, and now it's Al Iaquinta. I mean, Brett, how did we get here?
I mean, that would take probably longer than this radio segment would go on. There were a lot of different things that got us to this main event. I mean, on one hand, you can say, hey, this shows that the UFC can put on an event even when everything goes wrong, because absolutely everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. I mean, we only have, I think, 8 or 9 fights now left on this card. I believe 9. A lot of them have been canceled and shuffled around so much that it's hard to even keep track of who's fighting who today. But on the other hand, it does bring up some questions of the schedule and how busy it is and everything like that. But, the best thing I can say about this main event is that it's given a guy in Al Iaquinta an opportunity where, he hasn't fought in a while. He's actually butted heads with the UFC, and now he's coming in. He has a chance to win their lightweight championship. He found out about the fight basically on 24 hours notice. That is a crazy story, and that is a story that's worth watching. And it's a fight that I'm interested in, but it's not the way we planned it. And quite frankly, the way we planned it would have been better. I mean, I would love to see Tony Ferguson fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, but that's not happening.
So what does Al bring to this fight that could cause Khabib some trouble? Because to me, I look at Al Iaquinta's power in his hands, and I think, listen, if he connects with Khabib, that could be a long night for Khabib.
Yeah, I think, Al comes from a collegiate wrestling background, and that's the best thing he's got going for him. If you come in as just a striker, like there was a little bit of talk to put Anthony Pettis into this matchup instead of Al Iaquinta, that would have been a tough matchup for Pettis, because he just doesn't have that wrestling base. Iaquinta does. I mean, he's been wrestling his whole life. That's where he comes from. And yeah, his stand-up is very good, and he's a confident guy. He's fighting in New York. He's really got nothing to lose. I mean, he's coming into this situation with nothing to lose. This is an opportunity for him. So he'll be loose. All he's got to do is land some shots and hurt Khabib. I mean, that can happen in this sport with 4-ounce gloves, and he's got the wrestling background. He is a significant underdog. I expect Khabib to win, but I'm not counting him out. He's got a chance.
The one fight that has not been destroyed or disrupted or anything is the rematch between Rose Namajunas and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. We know that Rose came into that fight very motivated, very confident. What do you expect to see in this rematch? Can Joanna get that belt back, or is Rose still going to have the edge?
I really don't know. I mean, that is the fight that everyone, as we're talking about, it was the little time that we did spend talking about the fights this week. That's what we were saying. People are conflicted on that fight. That's a 50-50 fight. A lot of it comes down to mental preparation. I mean, how does Joanna Jędrzejczyk come back mentally? Does she have a lot of confidence after losing for the first time? And not just losing, but being knocked out in the way she did, and now she turns around and faces the same woman 5 months later. That can be a really big mental challenge. And then you add on top of it everything that happened this week. That affects those guys. That they were on those buses. They saw that. They were part of all of this circus. So who can block out the noise? Who can execute their game plan? They're both extremely talented fighters with a skill set to win this fight. I'm picking Rose, but it's right down the middle, 50-50 for me.
I know Dana has talked about opening up the 125 division for the women, and that is something that is slowly developing still. But, what is the future of 115? Because I know some of these girls, they're not going to want to keep cutting down on 115. They would rather go to 125. So what is the future of 115 when the 125 division really fleshes out?
Well, the 125 division is open. They featured it on The Ultimate Fighter and actually has a champion in Nico Montano. She's been injured, so she hasn't been fighting for a while. And we haven't really seen a whole lot of 125-pound fights because that just happened. But I expect it to have an effect on the 115, of course, but it's not going to have a huge effect. I mean, these women who have been fighting at 115, who are comfortable making the weight and who have a win streak going, they're going to stay there unless they go on a losing streak or the weight cut becomes too much. The women's divisions needed another division. They needed that 125-pound division because that was just too much of a gap. 20 pounds between weight classes is absolutely enormous. Some of those women who were cutting to 115, that was probably unsafe for them. So it was a good move by the UFC to open the 125, and that will settle, and they'll have 3 viable women's divisions there.
I know this has been a chaotic week for the UFC. Dana, he's probably doing way more talking about things that are not fights than he really ever wanted to. I remember when I spoke with him earlier this week, and you could tell he was frustrated. It felt like there was a lot of drained out of him. How has the UFC and Dana been kind of maneuvering through all these waters? Because we know that they invested a lot into this fight card, and now, as you said, we're down to 9 fights tonight.
I think they're all looking forward to it being over, quite frankly. I think they're all looking forward to getting out of Brooklyn and going back to Vegas, where obviously a lot of them live. That's where the UFC's headquarters is. And that's not to say, necessarily that their morale is just shattered or anything, but, you're talking about long work days. You're talking about trying to change promotional material for the different matchups there are. The UFC had a big press conference yesterday that they brought a lot of fighters into town that aren't even fighting this weekend. They're fighting on cards in the summer, and they put on a big press conference there. So, yeah, as an organization, they're feeling this right now. And not to mention that they were essentially attacked by their biggest star. Conor McGregor running in there and attacking that bus. There were UFC employees on that bus. There were UFC employees around it, affected by it. So they're tired, just like anybody else. This has been a weird week in Brooklyn, and I think most of the employees are probably ready for it to be over.
Follow him on Twitter at @Okamoto ESPN. Brett Okamoto, ESPN MMA Insider. He'll be covering UFC 223 tonight live on pay-per-view in Brooklyn. Brett, appreciate the time on a Saturday.
Yeah, you got it. Take care.